started. So for those of you that don't know who I am, my name is Jillian Sidoti. I am an attorney and a partner at crowdfundinglawyers.net, Trowbridge Sidoti. My partner is Jean Trowbridge, and we focus on real estate syndications and real estate funds specifically, but we also do a whole variety of other things in the same space. We only do securities transaction work. That's all we do. But one of the other things that we also do is syndications for film. We do funds for biotech. I've done some biotech deals. I've done some alcohol companies. Right now I'm working on a tequila and a vodka company. Also have dabbled in the marijuana space. Very scandalous. What else? Pretty much anything you need to raise money for, except for, I did have one time, a long time ago, somebody call me and asked me to help them put together an offering for their porn business. I refused. I politely declined. And I had another guy who wanted to start a gentleman's club. I also politely declined that. So I guess I do have some limitations, and those are them. All right, let's get started. Enough about porn and gentlemen's clubs. Here are just some of the things we do. Lauren's dying, everyone. I think I killed her. I think I officially killed her. So sad. All right, here we go. So today we're going to talk about creating a real estate fund, what, why, and how. So what is an equity fund? So an equity fund can be actually a variety of things. It's basically putting together dollars so that you can make equity investments in other companies or in real estate or in other assets. So if you think about a balance sheet, right, an equity investment is on the side of the balance sheet that liabilities is on, and it's the equity side. So if you think about a balance sheet, assets equals what? Liabilities plus stockholders' equity. And when we invest in a private equity fund, that is where we go. We go in the stockholders' equity portion of the balance sheet, or the member's interest if it's an LLC, or the limited partnership's interest if it's a limited partnership. So that's where we are on the balance sheet when it comes to an equity fund, and we're making investments and becoming owners in that particular company or asset. We're not becoming debt holders. We are becoming owners. And so if we look at the statistics, what we can see from 2015 through to Q3 of 2017, we can see the increase in a variety of different funds. And if you look down there in number 5 is real estate funds. And we can see, a minimal increase from 2015 to 2017. What I couldn't find were the statistics from 2008 to this time. I think that would be a very interesting thing to take a look at. The other thing you can look at here is a securitized asset fund, which also could mean mortgages. So we also see that category here. If you can see my little arrow, securitized asset fund. But what we're really interested in is the real estate fund and how many real estate funds there are out there. And there's definitely room for this. So what can you buy with an equity fund? Well, there's a couple of things you can buy. You can buy stocks in other companies, right? And that's our traditional equity fund. If we go back to look at our statistics, that's our private equity fund right up here. This top one is our private equity fund. Those are buying stocks in other companies for the most part. Or it could be purchasing interests in special purpose entities. And what does a special purpose entity do? A special purpose entity holds a specific asset, has a very specific purpose. And the reason why you normally use a special purpose entity is for the pure reason of hedging against liabilities. And I'm going to show you what I mean and how to use a special purpose entity specifically in a real estate fund here in a couple of slides. So I'll get into that in a second. But we often create special purpose entities to do a very particular purpose and to hedge against other liabilities outside of the special purpose entity. And then we have specific types of equity funds. We have real estate, technology, biotech, venture capital, stable companies, and film assets. Those are some of the funds that you can come up with. We are focusing on that top one of real estate and what that means. So why would you want to start an equity fund? Well, one, to diversify investments. A big thing lately that we're seeing is a huge concentration in certain asset classes. And maybe you've gotten to the point where you feel like you're overextended in a particular asset class. So for example, maybe you've invested a little too much in multifamily, need to move into a different space. Well, a fund is a great way to diversify your investments. Or maybe you're too heavily invested in just one asset and you need to diversify. So it doesn't have to necessarily transcend different asset classes. It could just transcend a different asset. And that's how we can diversify. You know where I see a lot of this is especially in note investing. In note investing, if you think about it, just owning one note isn't very valuable. You want to own a variety of notes. So you can start an equity fund for notes, to purchase notes, so you own more than one fund. Another reason why to perhaps consider an equity fund is to get off the hamster wheel. Now, I say I'm talking to you SFR investors, single family resident investors, because what I often see with single family flippers in particular is they have this thing where they've learned, and it's not necessarily a bad thing that they learned this, but they've learned to have their investors invest one deal at a time, right? So they have their investors come in, invest in one property, and in that one property, they either get a deed of trust or mortgage, or maybe they enter into a joint venture agreement, however they do it. But the sponsor, which is you, the person who's considering this equity fund, the sponsor, generally speaking, from my experience, will go out, find this one investor for this one deal, do the deal. But what happens at the end of that deal? You have to give the money back. And then you have to start all over again. And then you have to ask the investor again, do you want to invest? And if so, here are the deal terms on this one. And you have to sell each individual deal. It just becomes this hamster wheel of raising capital. So an equity fund will get you off that hamster wheel, because what happens with an equity fund? Well, instead, what we say to the investors is, I'm going to use your money to buy single families and flip them. And then I'm going to do it again and again and again for the next 5 years, at which time I will divest the fund of all its properties and return your capital to you. So that's why we would consider an equity fund specifically for single families. But you can do this for any asset class, like what we're going to talk about in a second. Also, I mentioned this, I alluded to this I alluded to this on Facebook earlier today, or right before this, this webinar, was a fund allows you to act quickly for opportunities. So what do I mean by that? What I'm seeing, especially in the multifamily space right now, is that a lot of entrepreneurs are missing out on opportunities. Right now, it's a feeding frenzy in multifamily. Now, there's a lot of opinions on this. Are there still good deals out there, or is it just too much of a feeding frenzy? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I have my own opinions, which I'll keep to myself for right now. But what I'm seeing is that people are losing out on deals that could be good deals because they don't have cash ready in hand, because they're thinking, I'm going to find the deal, then I'm going to syndicate the deal. That's not necessarily a bad plan. However, if you're finding that you're missing out on deals, good deals, all too often, whether it's in multifamily or some other asset class, one of the things you can do to hedge against that is to start a fund. What do I mean? Well, you start the fund, you say to your investors, these are the properties I'm going to be looking for. Now give me your money. And then you have cash in hand ready to go when a property comes up. So instead of racing to the finish line to raise all the capital to buy a specific deal, you raise the capital to buy any deal you want that fits within your deal points. And so what do I mean by that? Maybe we'll continue with multifamily again. Maybe you're a multifamily investor. I'm actually writing a deal like this right now, where the opportunity is to buy any kind of multi-unit residential type properties. Now, what I mean by that is that they could also be a hotel, multifamily, small multifamily, or condos. Multiple condos in one space. So that's what this particular fund does in the greater Houston area. So that's very specific. It's a fund, and they can act on any deal that fits those parameters. So what you need to do is just come up with what your parameters are. So what are some of the parameters you can come up with? Well, the thing is about doing a real estate fund is the sky's the limit. Now, let me say this, and I have this argument quite often with quite a few of my clients, unfortunately. You don't want to be overly broad. You don't want to be overly broad in geography. You don't want to be overly broad in asset class. Why? Because not only can you not do everything, I know you want to do everything. We all want to do everything. I run after shiny objects all the time. You can ask anybody in this office that I am the most guilty of running towards shiny objects. So I get the desire to do that. I really, really do get the desire to run towards shiny objects. And you see that you want to do single family flips. You see that you want to buy notes. You see that you want to get into self-storage. You see the value in doing all of these things. Then you also see the value of investing in, Western Florida. You see the value of investing in Seattle, Washington. You see the value of investing in Minnetonka, Minnesota. I don't know. But you see the value of these variety of classes. You see the value of investing in the variety of geographic spaces, which is great and awesome and wonderful. And I'm glad you know so much. But you got to check yourself before you wreck yourself. And what you need to do is really focus and narrow down what you want to do so you don't present a fund that causes investor confusion. And also, you need to be able to carry out the plan. And the danger you have with being overly broad is that you have that one investor who focuses on the one thing you didn't do in the plan. No matter how many times you said in the plan, I might not be able to do this one or two things. So I might not be able to do all these things. So you really want to keep your focus somewhat narrow and narrow to a doable extent. What can you actually do? Now, I see all kinds of different funds. Single family funds, I write a lot of those because they make the most sense, to be perfectly frank. It makes sense to get off that hamster wheel of doing one single family property at a time and instead creating a fund where you can raise all the money you need for all the single family properties you need. Multifamily funds, I've done a ton of these, especially in recent history. And if you read any of my Regulation A+ offerings, a lot of those are specifically multifamily funds. I'm personally invested in a fund that combines both self-storage and mobile home parks, which is really interesting. So there's a fund there that combines the two of them. I also, retail is on the rise, which is very strange to me considering, the proliferation of Amazon and home delivery and all this other stuff, but retail's actually on the rise. So we see retail funds. I've also seen retail coupled with office. And I just actually spoke to somebody the other day about a retail office fund as well. Senior living funds, I also see the senior living funds often coupled with single family and multifamily, because a lot of times you can buy a single family property and a multifamily property and turn that into some kind of assisted living facility. So it's a ground up construction senior living coupled with multifamily and single family. And then I also see a variety, but a lot of times that variety is then geographically focused or cap rate focused or some other metric focused. So you have to have somewhere that there's a focus so you can easily explain to an investor what it is you're investing in and what you're trying to get into. And that's really, really important. So I'm talking about all of this in a sense of offering equity to your investors. I started off talking about equity. That's what I'm continuing to talk about. I'm saying to you, when you offer to your investors, hey, do you want to invest with me? You're going to offer them an equity position. Now, I recently had somebody come to me and say, I don't want to offer my investors an equity position. I want to offer them a debt position. In other words, I want to sell them notes, unsecured notes that have a stated return, and the investors receive that stated return instead of receiving equity in the deal. And I'm absolutely positively against this for the most part. I have written debt funds before. I do have a couple that have been successful, but I'm pretty much against debt funds in the real estate space, especially now, because here's the issue with the debt fund. One, it creates a contractual obligation for you. If you're offering somebody an interest rate in a debt fund and you're saying, I'm going to pay you this interest at this specified interval of time, and then you don't perform, that investor can and probably will sue you for not performing. So that's a contractual obligation. You are contractually obligated to pay that interest and pay that payment as promised, regardless of whether you have the money or not. That can create a real problem for you if you have any delays in construction or rehab or getting a property stabilized. So we really want to consider instead, how can we offer our investors a stated return without creating this contractual obligation? And what we can do is achieve the same result with a preferred return. So what's a preferred return? So for you, those of you that don't know what a preferred return is, a preferred return is offering a stated return, usually annualized, on an investment, but the return is only paid in the event that the profits are there. So for example, we could say we're going to give you an 8% preferred return, but you would only provide that 8% return on investment if the money is there, if the profits support paying that preferred return. If the profits don't support paying that preferred return, then it doesn't get paid until they do. And the investors, generally speaking, do not have any recourse until such time that you do have the money to pay them. And this keeps everyone safe. This keeps investors who are not hostile safe from hostile investors. It keeps the property safe. It keeps you safe. It puts these safeguards in place while still offering your investors something that they can understand and touch and you can articulate. So I get the desire to say a stated return. We can achieve that through a preferred return. And I'm going to teach you, before this presentation is over, how do we get to that preferred return? All right, moving on. So how do we set this whole thing up? So this is what a fund model looks like. Typically speaking, and let me see it. I got a little laser pointer here. Oh, cool. So typically speaking, if we had a deal where we had the investors investing and we were doing a syndication, where would the investors invest? They would invest right here. Do you see this Property One LLC? They would invest in the Property One LLC, and then they would be only invested in property number one. That's typically what our syndication looks like. So what are we going to do in order to create a fund? We're going to add another LLC in there. So we'll have this fund LLC, and then the fund LLC will invest in what we call special purpose entities. And generally speaking, the fund is the only member of the special purpose entity, which is property number 1, which then invests in property number 2. Now, why is this good for everybody? This is good for everybody because the investors invest in fund number 1, and then they get, each of them, through ownership of fund LLC to property LLCs, they get a little piece of each property as opposed to only being invested in one property. So this creates diversification for the investors. This creates diversification for the investors. It allows you to raise capital and then spread it out as you see fit. And then the special purpose entities, these little entities down here, create liability hedges from each other. So really what we're doing by creating these is we're cutting these off from each other, right? We're saying you can't touch this property LLC, property number 3, you cannot touch property number 2, because each of these are in their own special purpose entities, their own little pods of protection, if you will. So this is our model. We have a manager LLC. This is where you are, you, with a little happy face. And maybe you have a partner. You guys are both here, right? And then that manager LLC is going to manage your fund LLC. And this is where your investors are. This is like, you know what this is like? This is reminding me of. Okay, some of you will get this. Too far? Too far. Sorry. Sorry. Just a little fun. Just a little fun on Tuesday morning. All right. Moving on. All right, so some things you want to consider. Now, look. I'm going to do a whole nother webinar on this. I don't want to get in the weeds too much, but a question that typically comes up is, am I an investment company if I start an equity fund? And the answer is maybe. So what do we do to avoid the Investment Company Act of 1940? So a lot of you are like, I've never even heard of the Investment Company Act of 1940. I don't want to hear about the Investment Company Act of 1940, and I'm sure you don't. Most of us don't. I don't want to hear about the Investment Company Act of 1940. What we want to do is look for an exclusion. Fortunately, for real estate offerings, if you have a fund that mostly invests in real estate, you have what's called an exclusion from the Investment Company Act under 3C5. You have an exclusion under 3C5. So if you mostly purchase real estate, you have that exclusion from the Investment Company Act of 1940. But let's just say you want to invest in other things other than real estate. There's a couple of different ways you can go about this. Well, first one, you could have an exclusion under 3C1. So if you have less than 99 investors, most of you hopefully will have less than 99 investors. And I say hopefully because you're going to find out once you start doing these that you don't like investors very much. But there's also ways to get your investors to love you and for you to love your investors. And it really falls on your shoulders to make sure that you love your investors and that your investors love you. And that's another webinar for another day. And then there's another way to also have an exclusion, which is under 3C7, which is qualified purchasers. And qualified purchasers are like a big, huge step above accredited investors, which are individuals or family-owned businesses that have $1 million or more in investments, a trust sponsored and managed by qualified purchasers, a person acting for his own account or the account of someone else that owns and invests at least $25 million in investments, and any entity exclusively owned by qualified purchasers. So that's what a qualified purchaser is. So then for us, what do? How do we set up our real estate fund? Well, you can have a real estate fund under, as far as I'm concerned, three different exemptions. 506B as in boy. 506B as in boy allows you to raise as much money as you want from up to 35 sophisticated investors and as many accredited investors as you want, so long as you don't use what? General solicitation. What's general solicitation? It's advertising for investors. Please see my other webinars to hear more about that. Under 506C as in Charlie, which was a new rule created under the Jobs Act, it allows you to raise as much money as you want from accredited investors only. Accredited investors are those who make $200,000 a year as an individual, $300,000 a year as a married couple, or have a net worth of $1 million exclusive of their primary residence. You have to verify that those investors that are investing with you are actually accredited, but you can indeed use general solicitation. Again, that's advertising for investors. If you want to hear more about that subject, I have plenty of webinars about that. And then finally, Regulation A. Regulation A is a mini IPO. A mini IPO is a public offering that allows you to generally solicit for any investor in the United States, actually any investor really anywhere, but you do have to get approval from the SEC, and you also have to get an audit of your books. And you can check out an upcoming webinar for that as well. And plus we have a ton of articles online. If you just go to our website at crowdfundinglawyers.net, you can find a variety of things there. And then also, if you'd like to read some Regulation A offerings, you're welcome to email me, Jillian@crowdfundinglawyers.net, and I will send you a variety of Regulation A offerings I've written for real estate funds. Now, also, if you're interested, I'll just send you a list of those Regulation A offerings I've written for real estate funds, not because you want to read a Regulation A offering, but because you want to see how a real estate fund might be put together. So again, my email address is Jillian@crowdfundinglawyers.net, and I will be happy to send you that list. Please just write in the subject line, real estate fund listings, and I will blast you back with all of my Reg A offerings that I've done for real estate that you can read. Okay, so we're really supposed to be talking about real estate funds here, so we're going to leave this slide there, and now I'm going to move on to telling you how to figure out that preferred return, or what the deal structure is going to be for your investors. How are you going to pay your investors? What are you telling your investors that they're getting? What are their distributions going to be? How do we figure that out? And the thing I'm going to tell you is always work backwards. Always work backwards. So what do I mean by this? The first thing you want to figure out is how much do you need to make? It's true. You are not figuring out what the investor needs to make first. You need to figure out what you need to make first, because you're giving up your time that you can never get back. The other thing is, the problem with not figuring, and this happened recently with a client, it actually happened with a couple of clients recently. That's why this is so important. The problem with you not figuring out how much you need to make first is twofold. One, you're going to get into it, you're not going to allocate enough money for yourself, and you're going to be frustrated and angry and not want to work. And that's not good for your investors. It's not good for you. Number two, the tendency to spend money where you're not supposed to spend money because you didn't allocate it is higher and very likely, and even if it's unintentional. And I said this the other day to somebody, and they laughed at me, but it's totally true. Most people who have Ponzi schemes going don't wake up one day and go, I'm going to start a Ponzi scheme. It happens. It just happens that way. And then they get too far into it, and it's too far gone. So I'm going to tell you, this is why this part is so important, and what I'm saying about working backwards is so very, very, very important. So you want to figure out, how much do I need to make first? Then figure out, these are the deals I'm going to be looking at, and then the difference between the two of them. And if you're making, if what you need to make is more than your deals are going to make, obviously you shouldn't be doing this at all, because now you're already at a negative number. But so you come up with a number, the amount of money the deals are going to make that you're looking for, the amount of money you're going to make. That's going to give you, X. Is X what we offer the investor? No. Then we have to take out Y. What is Y? Y is our contingency. So X minus Y. So X is the difference between what we believe our deals will make, the deals we're looking for, less what we need to make, gives us X. Then we take out Y, which is a contingency, which can be anywhere from 10 to 20%. And then Z, X minus Y equals Z. Z is what you can offer your investors. And that's what you can give them as a preferred return. Or perhaps you want to do a preferred return and an equity split. And we do have other webinars on deal structure and how to put that together and the different types of deal structures you can do. But this method is in the best interest of everyone, you, your investors, the public at large. So and I'm very serious. I'm not joking at all about when I say this. That is the way to do it. You always work backwards. Now, I'm going to tell you something else. This part of it is not as important as this next slide. Have a story to sell. If you have a fund that's based solely on returns, you will not be successful in raising capital, because that doesn't tell a story to the investor. You really need to have a story to sell. So, I'll use my own backyard for an example. Right now we have a ton of single family home construction going on here in Temecula. This area in general, Southern California in general, Inland Empire it's called. Tons of single family construction going on. Now, there's two things about this. There's two things. One, in California in particular, there are no basements and there are no attics. That was one thing about living in the Northeast, is that you got these great storage spaces. You got basements and you got attics. In almost every house, you have a basement and an attic. You don't have that in Southern California at all. So now we see people moving into these homes with no storage space, no place to put their Christmas decorations, no place to put their garden tools, whatever. Everything is in the garage, and then people get frustrated that the garage gets overfilled, and next thing you know, what do they need? Self-storage facilities. So that's the story one would sell on investing in self-storage in Temecula, California. Also, when the economy goes down, a lot of people are going to be moving out of those homes, and they're not going to want to get rid of their stuff, and they're going to put it into self-storage. When there's a flight, always when the economy goes down, there's a flight of people out of Southern California, and they're going to want to put their stuff somewhere, self-storage facilities. So that would be the story to sell. Now, I just told you a story about investing in self-storage facilities in Southern California, and I didn't talk about returns once. Why? Because the investor will draw their own conclusion about the returns. You got to have the story to sell. What is the story? I could tell you a story about anything. So if you want to, in the Q&As, put your scenario and we'll put the story together here. Alrighty. So that's what I have for slides. I see all kinds of awesome things in here. Oh, Carl likes the classical music at the beginning. I'm glad you liked it. Thank you so much, Carl. This is Devin from Oxygen. Question, what's the best way to attract debt capital partner for $180 million, assuming we have $60 million for down payment or a startup similar to Open Door? Okay, that's awesome. So, Devin, that's really, really, really cool. I hear you saying the debt capital partner, and you say $60 million for a down payment. What's the down payment on? Is the down payment on a property? And I'm going to go back to my slide about debt funds and why I don't love debt funds. specifically with real estate funds. And one thing I totally forgot to mention, I meant to, because I have a bazillion thoughts running through my mind at all times, is banks don't like debt funds, even though the debt fund is behind them. So I really want to encourage you to consider what I've said here about preferred returns and equity funds, especially if you're investing in a property, because debt funds generally, banks generally speaking do not like debt funds behind them, even though they're behind them. They want to see equity behind them. So just consider that if you would. You're also welcome to, if you'd rather message me privately, that's fine as well. And to find that kind of money is a huge undertaking. I kind of need some more details. And if you're doing something like Open Door, you might want to be looking into venture capital or some kind of angel investing as well. So, but you're welcome to email me. Do we pay minimum interest while holding funds? That's a great question, Athena. So what I always do is I put into our offerings that we can hold your funds up to 4 months, no returns required, no returns accruing. After 4 months, we either have to return your money or get permission from you to continue holding your money, but no returns would be accruing while money is in what we call a subscription account, or if you're going to use an escrow account, an escrow account. Funds only accrue a return when they get invested into a property, when they move from the company out into an asset. Can these be fund of funds? That is a great question. Can these be fund of funds? And yes, you just have to be really, really careful at making sure you still have that exclusion under the Investment Company Act, because if you don't, then you're gonna run yourself into problems. So you do want to make sure you still maintain an exclusion under the Investment Company Act. But can you have a fund of funds? Absolutely. Ben asks, I have my California real estate sales license right now. I am doing continuing education to make sure I keep my real estate license. Can you please explain the difference between forming a real estate syndicate versus private equity fund? Thanks. So I think I did in this last slide over here. Let's take a look. Yeah, and Ben, it's nice to see you here. Thank you so much for coming. So if we go back to my slide here, if you're doing a real estate syndication, right? If you're doing a real estate syndication, your investors are investing here. Okay, that's the difference. So we're focusing on one property. So this would be a syndication. And this right here is our fund, which is investing in, 3 different, or it could be 4, it could be 5, it could be 2. But that's where the difference is between a syndication and a fund. I hope I answered that for you. So, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Hari asks, I have 100 members in my pool. I have one property where 10 of the members are willing to participate. Can I allocate the returns from this property to 10 members only? What should be the legal structure to make this happen? Hi, Hari, that's a great question, and I've done this for a couple of different things. What I would strongly recommend to you is to consider doing a series LLC. Lauren, would you write down for me to do a webinar on series LLCs and starting a fund with a series LLC? I think that's really what you want to do. You're welcome to email me about that separately. I have done a couple of series LLC funds before, and what those have actually focused on is not real estate. I've done one for racehorses, I've done one for collectibles, and I've actually done one for single family residences as well. What it allows you to do is create several different series, and then your investors can invest in the several different series, but you have one offering at the top, and then your investors can choose which series they want to actually get invested in. So if you'd like to write me about that, you can, and I will also do a webinar on that sometime soon. Dr. Paul Wendy asks, what entity structure should we use here? Well, I have here on the screen an LLC structure, but you can use a limited partnership. I have used limited partnerships before, but 9 times out of 10 people use LLCs. The reason why we usually use LLCs is because we have flexibility in voting, we have flexibility in structure, we have flexibility in tax allocations. So, and you don't have those same flexibilities with a limited partnership. Dr. Paul Wendy also asks, what are the all-in costs to set up an equity fund? Well, we charge the same amount to start up an equity fund as we do for a syndication. Generally speaking, you're paying between $10,000 and $15,000 to get everything together, but it depends on how big that fund is. We do charge the differential is slight in terms of how much money you're going to raise. So the more money you're going to raise, the more it's going to cost. If you want a custom quote, you're welcome to reach out to me, but most of our clients pay between $10,000 and $15,000. Some of the bigger funds will pay between $20,000 and $30,000. So the bigger you are, the more you're going to pay. It's really that simple. Devin asks, I need to drop off for another call. Feel okay. He's not even here. I'm answering his questions. He's not even here. All right, Chris asks, do we have to file for that exclusion, or is it implied, assume, as long as you just invest in real estate? No, it's implied and assumed. You're excluded. There's nothing to file for under the Investment Company Act of 1940, so long as you have that exclusion available to you under 3C5. Okay, Brian asks, great info. That is the story I'm looking to tell, self-storage. Well, awesome, Brian. I'm glad I spoke right to you. And so you just got to figure out what the story is specific to your area and apply it. You know, the reality is people just don't want to get rid of their stuff. I read this really interesting article in recent history about baby boomers were huge collectors or continue to be huge collectors and their kids don't want their, you know, their collectibles. They just don't want them. But no one wants to buy them. But the children and the parents also don't want to sell them. So where are they going? Self-storage. All right, so DJ asks, are there any special considerations if you're partnering with another GP on a deal? Yeah, there are some considerations. And those considerations are disclosing who that other GP is, talking about their qualifications, and then also talking about the risks related to doing a joint venture. So if you look at a lot of my public Regulation A offerings, you can read there. I have a whole section on co-investment and joint ventures and the risks associated with co-investing and joint venturing with partners or other general partners. So if you'd like to read those, you're welcome to email me and I'll send you copies of the Reg A's that I've done. Pilar says, hi. Thomas asked, what is the sweet spot for the amount you should raise in a real estate fund? Thomas, that's totally up to you. So what is the sweet spot for the amount you should raise in a real estate fund? Let's get personal about this. It's how much you personally can raise and spend in a year. That is the number you should be using. How much you personally can raise and spend in a year is what you should write your real estate fund for. And by the way, no more than that. And so I get a lot of people who come to me and say, I want to do a $50 million fund. And my answer to them is, are you going to actually raise $50 million? And the answer sometimes is, well, I don't know. Let's see. And we kind of volley back and forth, and I'll say, look, you want to go with what you believe you truly or you know you can raise, and why? Because look, there is something not so deeply psychological, something psychological about saying to an investor, I have a $50 million fund and I've only raised $5 million. I have a $5 million fund and I'm sold out. Huge difference in the psychology to the investor, huge difference in your own psyche. So you really want to consider what you're capable of doing, what you know you can do in a year, as opposed to, you know, just shooting for the stars or shooting for the moon and landing in the stars. I don't agree with that philosophy. When it comes to your real estate fund, I think you want to be realistic about it so that you can make a big splash instead of just, you know, a little droplet, whatever. My analogy there got a little lost, sorry. Roaring wave as opposed to a leaf falling in a pond. Isn't that poetic? Moving on. I just dismissed somebody's question without asking it. Hold on, let me go back Is a note fund or any real estate fund considered real estate as a fund asset, or is it a security? Dear Ian, I don't understand your question. I'm so sorry, but I'm going to attempt to answer it anyhow. Is a note fund or any real estate fund considered real estate as a fund asset, or is it a security? A note fund, I'm going to make a couple of assumptions here. I'm assuming you're talking about under the Investment Company Act. A note fund is an excluded fund under 3C5. So a mortgage fund is excluded under 3C5. So you're in luck. I think that's what you were asking. If you weren't, just ask it again, and we'll go from there. Okay, Jerry asks, recommendations for sources to read, study more on starting equity funds. I'm going to have an article come out, or like a white paper on it, so I'll get that together for you. I actually already have it written. I just want to edit it, so be sure to be on the lookout for that from our newsletter. I don't answer questions from anonymous attendees, so please write your name if you'd like to ask a question. Arnold asks, what are the fee percentages, costs associated with capital raised with crowdfunding platforms? Are the fees on the equity raised or on the deal size? What are the fees associated? I think, okay, with the capital raised on crowdfunding platforms, that depends on the crowdfunding platform, Arnold, and what they want to take for their pound of flesh. So I know some of them work in the flat fee space. Others work on a percentage because they have a broker-dealer license. Most of them don't work on a percentage or can't because they don't have a broker-dealer license. So that really just depends on the crowdfunding website itself. Scott asks, could you pair a preferred equity fund but use it to lend to projects as construction debt? Yes, you can, and that's exactly how I recommend that you do it, that you don't do a lending fund where you're lending money out and then you also offer debt to your investors, because then your investors are relying that this money over here is going to pay on time. So you have it right, Scott. You want to offer equity to your investors and debt to your borrowers. Absolutely. Would that avoid the contractual obligation to investors? It would. You yet have the benefit and safety of first deed trust encumbrances against property as debt. Absolutely, you have it correct. So good job, Scott. Good job breaking that down. John asks, is there an average for annual ongoing costs for audits, etc.? It's your choice to do an audit if you're a private company. I, generally speaking, recommend that you tell your investors straight up front, we're not going to be doing an audit. We're going to give you your tax returns at the end of the year in a timely fashion. And this is good for you and it is good for them. And here's why: because audits cost money and you save your investors money by not doing the audit. So that's my recommendation there. My dress keeps bunching up. I don't like it. All right, DJ asks, the 4 months clause, does that apply to each investor or the group as a whole? That's a great question. I say it's from the moment that the investor invests. So you can hold an individual investor's money for as long as 4 months. Now sometimes with the syndication, we just cut it off at a particular 4-month mark when it's a specific syndication. But with equity funds, we hold an individual investor's money for up to 4 months before we send the money out to a property. Franklin asks, does this LLC structure work for an opportunity zone fund? It's exactly the same, Franklin. So yes, it does work for an opportunity zone fund. Chris asks, if the fund just invests in one property, is that a syndication? Or is that simply overcomplicating a syndication? Well, it's funny you ask that, Chris, because I have a lot of people who do what's called a semi-blind pool. A semi-blind pool, which means that they say we're only going to buy one property. So you can do that way where you get the money in advance. And the reason why you'd want to do that is because, again, you want to be able to act quickly on properties lest you miss out on deals. All right, Arthur asks, hello Jillian, thanks for the great presentation. Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for the compliment. I have a couple of questions specifically about REITs. Question number one, let's say I set up a REIT as a corporation with 1 billion shares. Can I keep 90 million shares for a nominal consideration? For example, 5 million as a founder and sell the remaining 910 million shares at $1 per share to outside investors. Yes. I think that fits within the rules. I'd have to double check the rules on that one, but I think that fits within the rules. So I'm going to say yes. Number two, I know that most of the public REITs, over 60%, are set up in Maryland for some historic reasons. So does it make sense for me to set up a REIT in Maryland, and would you be able to help me with it? Yes, absolutely. I would be able to help you with that. And it's because Maryland has specific real estate investment trust laws. That's why historically we see things set up in Maryland, but you really can set up a REIT in a variety of different states, but that's why we see them in Maryland. Rick asks, Jillian, do you normally set up funds with capital call provisions with the capital calls done when an asset is acquired? We do have capital call provisions in our documents. However, I have a guy who runs a pretty big mortgage fund out of Calabasas, very successful fund, really smart guy, and he had a capital call provision in his documents, like when we fund, we'll call your money. But for him, it was like, even for him, who is super organized, has a great back end office, has a great setup, and has an awesome fund that's raised a ton of money. Even he found that to be cumbersome, and changed it so that he collected money at the moment of subscription and put it in an escrow account or a subscription account, because it was just like herding cats. You know, he'd come up with a deal, the deal needed to get funded, and he couldn't fund in time because he was, herding his investors in. And what are you going to do? Scream at your investors, give me your money? You're not going to do that. It's not good practice. It's not good for your mental health. It's not good for your investors. So I get the logic behind doing that. It makes sense. It probably makes sense to the investor as well. But at the end of the day, everybody's just happier if you just keep it in a subscription account and then deploy it as the opportunity arises. Jay asks, as a fund manager, what licensing is required? You generally speaking don't need any license so long as you stick inside the rules and the exemptions that are available to you. I don't know which kind of license you would think you would need. You don't need a securities license. You would have an exemption under 3A41 for an issuer exemption so long as you follow the rules. Douglas asks, do you need to be more liquid in a real estate equity fund versus a syndication? It seems in a syndication, we tell investors they cannot get their funds for X years. You do the same with a real estate equity fund. Absolutely, Douglas, you do the same exact thing. Sometimes I'll have a fund that is like operates in perpetuity. And if we have a fund that operates in perpetuity, then in that case, we might have a redemption clause where we can redeem interests as people ask for redemption within certain parameters. So if you want to have a fund that operates in perpetuity, then you would have a redemption clause or a withdrawal clause. Otherwise, if you have a natural sunset to the fund, then you would also tell those investors they can't get out until that natural sunset comes up, or the sunset that the manager employs comes up. And that, if you read those Regulation A's that I spoke of, the funds that I've done under Regulation A, you will see that in a lot of them. How long to fund the fund, and is it always open? I think I just answered that question. You can have a fund in, I see what you're asking. You're actually asking a different question, Brian. I'm sorry. I jumped the gun on that one. How long to fund the fund, and is it always open? It can be. You want to be really careful with keeping an open-ended fund, though, because think about it. The value is going to be different a year from now. The terms are going to be different. The risks are going to be different. So I generally say keep the fund open for funding for a year and then reopen the fund as you see fit or as opportunities arise. and edit your documents appropriately and treat those new investors appropriately. Perhaps even do a subordinated class of securities from your original investors so that your original investors are feeling special for acting early. Ian asks, is a note fund or any real estate fund consider real estate as a fund asset or is it a security? I think I did answer that question. Norris asks, so that I understand with preferred return, if the property cash flows enough, the return can be paid out monthly or accrued to exit solely at fund discretion. I hope that makes sense. Yes, that's correct. You set that up at first though. So normally what we'll do is, especially with a fund situation where we don't know the properties, we don't know what's going to happen, we'll say, we're going to pay returns quarterly, but we're not going to start paying returns for at least a year. And then we're going to start paying our preferred return quarterly. Something to that effect. I do have one right now that's accrued to exit. I just finished writing that one. So that could happen as well. All right, guys, I know there's more questions here. I'm saving all those questions. We have 16 more questions. So I'm going to save those because we are over our allotted time for this webinar. And wow, you guys have a lot of questions. No. Lauren's like, do you want to keep going? I can't. I unfortunately have another meeting that's going to be starting here soon for somebody who's coming into my office. I apologize to anybody who asked a question. I am going to answer these on our Facebook page. I'm going to answer them one by one. So please check our Facebook page if you asked a question. And by the way, you guys, I want to tell you, amazing questions today. Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming and participating. That means so much to me. And so please don't take this as a dismissal of your questions. I just have other things going on today. And I allocate an hour for this webinar. So check us out on Facebook at the Crowdfunding Lawyers page. Also check out Private Money Rockstar. That's my newish entity that I've created for education purposes only. Where we don't really offer legal services, but we offer education on how to raise private money, not just from a legal perspective, but also from a marketing perspective, because I know even though I'm the legal person in it all, and you hire me to do your law stuff, I understand that you can't raise money if you don't have both, and I want to offer you both. So check out Private Money Rockstar if you're looking for not just legal advice, but you're also looking for business marketing advice when it comes to raising private capital. Thank you everyone so much. We've saved your questions. I've got them all. I'll answer them on Facebook. I'll try to tag you if I can. Make sure you like us on Facebook so I can tag you, Crowdfunding Lawyers and Private Money Rockstar. Thank you everyone so much for coming out today, and I'll see you all soon.